السلام عليكم. Hello. Hello.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
حياكم الله وإياك يا شيخ.
أهلا بك دكتور لقمان.
طيب، ننتظر دقيقة أو دقيقتين أو نبدأ الآن؟
كما تريد بإذن الله.
أوكي، خير إن شاء الله. أعتقد قد أعوذ بالله. نبدأ. الحمد لله.
تفضل.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستهدي ونتوب إليه ونعوذ به من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. أما بعد، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Alhamdulillah, today we are going to talk about one of the greatest aspect of prohibition, that is muharramat in Islamic contracts, which is a riba. And majority of us, we know what is riba, and many of us may not know the details of what constitutes riba. And that is why it is important in these lectures for the next few weeks, we talk about what constitutes riba in Islam and what is the concept of riba in Islam and what the types of riba, the classification of riba. So as you know, my name is Lukman Zakaria, a professor of Islamic jurisprudence and the head of the Department of Religious Studies, the Federal University of Kashiri, Gombe, Nigeria. The contents of today's lecture, I will introduce the cause briefly, then I will talk about riba definition, the history of riba, and I will talk about the prohibition of riba in other religions, classification of riba as nafur ribawiya, then I will talk about types of riba and wa'a riba, then the cause, the reason for the prohibition of riba. Last week, I talked about these underlying principles of prohibition of sales contracts in Islamic law, that is the قواعد للتحريم الأشياء في المعاملات أو في العقود عقود البيوع. And I made mention that al-aslu fil ma'amalat al-ibah. The general principles in Islamic transactions is what? Al-ibaha, that is permissibility. Nothing can be prohibited without the evidence from the Quran and Sunnah or by analogical reasoning, which is qiyas in Islamic law. However, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran declared riba as something that is haram. So there is no any debate on whether riba is haram or not. When Allah says, وَأَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَى, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibits, allows al-bay', that is sales, وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَى, and it prohibits riba. Now, I mentioned last week what are the general elements of prohibition of sales. I made mention about an-najasat, and this is a substance prohibited in Islam. It is prohibited because it's a substance and there's no any ways that we can use to halalize it. And some of these are like al-khinzir, pork, pig, al-kalib, Though the Caliph dog, there are some arguments whether all dogs are haram, or there are some dogs which are haram and there are some dogs which are not haram. But that is not the point of our discussion lectures in this section. I also talked about prohibition of gharar last week, which is about uncertainty. And I went through the types of uncertainty, gharar, the tolerable and not tolerable one, and how we can determine which gharar is tolerable and which gharar is not tolerable. The third one, which I didn't mention and I didn't talk about last week, is the prohibition of riba, usury, and which is the topic of today's class. And I said briefly last week that riba can be classified into two. The first type is riba nasiha, that is a riba in increase that or excess that you put in the delaying of a loan. And sometimes they call it riba fiduyun. When someone borrows something from you and you increase on the amount of what he has borrowed because of the delay in returning the loan back to you. The second one is riba al-fadl, that is riba of increase in the quantity and the quality of commodity, and they call it riba fi al-buyu'. So this is what we are going to talk about today in this class. Now, what is the definition of riba? I will talk about this one, and I will talk about reference to the Bible, other religion that talks about riba. Then I will also enumerate some of the verses on ahadith and aqwal al-ulama on riba. Now let us take the definition of riba and to see what are the elements we can derive from this definition. First of all, riba has been classified in Arabic as aslu min raba, waya, and that is literally means to grow, to expand or increase, and it could be inflating the price or excess in charging. It is generally translated in English as usury or interest, because not every increase and growth is prohibited. As we know, or we know in some of the verses of the Quran, that Allah makes sadaqat grows, wa yurbi sadaqat. So that growth in sadaqah is not haram. So in order not to mix between the growth which is halal and which is haram, the English translation of riba is usury, U-S-U-R-Y, or sometimes in the modern transaction, they call it interest. And that is why when we want to charge anything in transaction in Islam, we don't say interest on it, we say profit on it, okay? Technically, riba in Sharia refers to a premium. When you charge a premium, that must be paid by the borrower to the lender along with the principal amount as a condition for the loan or for an extension in its maturity. So when you charge a premium on any loan that you borrow someone because of the extension you give him, or because he will pay it back in a long term. So this is what they call riba and nasiha. Riba and nasiha is when someone borrows something from you, and because it's not going to pay immediately, so you charge him or extra money on top of the capital that it took from you. Riba also means an increase in one of the homogeneous equivalents being exchanged without this increase being accompanied by a return. So when something which are similar are exchanged, rise and rise, date and date, belly with belly, width with width, when they are changed or exchanged without any equality between the two, then that is also a riba, and it is classified as riba al-fadl. Now, in order to combine the two together, the two definition of riba, riba in Islam encompasses every return and all excess arising purely in consideration of time allowed for the use of money or of any other thing of value lent, as also every such increase on goods exchange, violation of any or all of the mandates of sawa'an bi sawa, mithlan bi mithli, yadan bi yadin. It is, riba comprises two things: either on the loan that you charge extra on top of it because of the time value, that is the time of the returning of the money back to you, or the commodity, or the exchange that doesn't consider yadan bi yadin, mithlan bi mithli, equal for equal, like for like, and hand to hand. That is, it must be on spot. So this definition is considered or ascribed to Justice Wahiduddin Ahmad, one of the Pakistani Chief Judge. And I think this definition incorporates all the two types of riba. Now, riba in other religion. We all know the accents, the ancient philosophers and Greek and Roman thinkers forbade interest. By history, we know that even the Old Testament similarly prohibited riba. Let us see the Exodus in 22:25. It says, if you lend money to any of my people that is adherent of Christianity or Judaism, with you who is poor, that is a less privileged person, you shall not be like a money lender to him. That is, you shouldn't be like a money lender. What money lender does, he puts more on the capital he lends someone. So it has been stated in that verse of Exodus that don't treat your brother as a money lender to him. You should treat him as your brother so that you don't compound on his problem and you don't exploit him because of his situation. So the view of John Lloyd Hanson, expressed in his Dictionary of Commerce and Economics, are worth quoting here. What did he say? It says, usury, a term now restricted to the charging of a very high rate of interest on a loan. That is, riba is now being used as charging of a very high rate of interest. So they call it interest, but it is usury, and they consider any high rate of interest as usury, but formerly used in connection with interest, whether the rate charged was high or low. So we cannot say usury is when you charge higher rate of interest. Whether it is low or it is high, it is also considered as usury. The medieval church, following the law of Moses and the writings of Aristotle and other Greek philosophers, condemned the payment of interest on loan as usury and unjust. So the usury laws passed in the 16th century prohibited a rate of interest in England in excess of 5%. So it was said that previously, these kind of interest that they charge in the banks are being prohibited even in the church's law, in the Moses law, and so on, so even in the Aristotle's and Greek philosophers' law. So they do not accept anything like that. But today, it has been a common practice in the bank that whether it is 5% or 2% or 1%, it is also considered as usury, and it is prohibited in any civilized society. In the Quran, we find many verses of the Quran that prohibits riba, in hadith of the prophets, and also narration of the companions and the tabi'i, the successors, and also in the opinion of classical Muslim jurists. Let us take some examples of the stages of prohibition of riba in the Quran. The first stage is considered as something not allowed. And that is why in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he was talking about the prohibition or the bad practices of sales, he compared riba with zakat and charity. And he says, وَمَا آتَيْتُمْ مِنْ رِبَا لِيَرْبُوَ فِي أَمْوَالِ النَّاسِ فَلَا يَرْبُو عِنْدَ اللَّهِ وَمَا آتَيْتُمْ مِنْ زَكَاةٍ تُرِيدُونَ وَجْهَ اللَّهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُضْعِفُونَ. That is, whatever you have given in a kind of riba in order that it may increase. That is, you want to take it from the property of your brother, of people, has no increase with Allah. فَلَا يَرْبُوَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ. So the kind of giving someone money and taking more of it is not allowed. But وَمَا آتَيْتُم مِّن زَكَاةٍ تُرِيدُونَ وَجْهَ اللَّهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُضْعِفُونَ. Whatever you spend in charity that you are looking for the pleasure of your Lord, that is what Allah will make increase in it. So in another verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned about zakat, about riba, but in attaching these practices to the Jew. And it considered these practices as a zulm, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned that فَبِالظُّلْمِ مِنَ الَّذِينَ هَادُوا حَرَّمْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ طَيِّبَاتٍ أُحِلَّتْ لَهُمْ. In that, Allah says, وَأَخْذِهِمُ الرِّبَا وَقَدْ نُهُوا عَنْهُ. And for them that they are taking riba, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prohibited it for them. Okay, and the Quran says, and their taking of riba, وَأَخْذِهِمُ الرِّبَا, though they were forbidden from taking it, and their devouring of men's substance wrongfully, وَأَكْلِهِمْ أَمْوَالَ النَّاسِ بِالْبَاطِلِ. And Allah says, وَأَعْتَدِنَا لِلْكَافِرِينَ مِنْهُمْ عَذَابًا أَلِيمًا. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prepared a painful torment, punishment for the unbelievers among them. That is the second stage. The third stage is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala call upon the believers that they shouldn't take riba ad'afan mudha'afa. Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu la ta'kulu riba ad'afan mudha'afa wattaqullaha la'allakum tuflihun. Oh, you who believe, eat not riba doubled or multiple, but fear Allah that you may be successful. The third one is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks extensively about the prohibition of riba. And that verse in Surah Al-Baqarah runs from 275 to 281. 281. So in those verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhalladhina alladhina ya'kuluna riba la yaqumuna illa kama yaqumu alladhi yatakhabbathu ash-shaytanu min al-mas. ذلك بأنهم قالوا إنما البيع مثل الربا وأحل الله البيع وحرم الربا فمن جاءه موعظة من ربه فانتهى فله ما سلف وأمره إلى الله ومن عاد فأولئك أصحاب النار هم فيها خالدون. So the meaning of this verse is what is on the screen, not to repeat it. But in that particular verse, Allah threatened and explained that anyone who is taking riba will never be resurrected except like the standing of person beaten by shaitan. Okay, and that is because they equate trading as to be like riba, but Allah prohibits riba, but it allows the sales. So whoever take this admonition and refrain from taking riba, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward him. But whoever indulge in it, he will be punished. So Allah continued to talk about riba severely. He says, يَمْحَقُ اللَّهُ الرِّبَى وَيُرْبِي الصَّدَقَاتِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroy riba and we give increase for sadaqat. He also says, "O you who believe, be afraid of Allah and give up what remains due to from the riba, if you are really believers." So, ya ayyuhalladhina amanu taqullaha wa dharu ma baqiya min ar-riba. Until he talks about how Muslims should deal with his brother and his sister. So those are the verses where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibits riba. However, Quran doesn't define riba, not provide any detailed explanation about riba. Only the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in many stages explain what is riba, what type of riba, what constitutes riba, and so on and so forth. So in hadith, generally we find out that Quran explain what is riba al-fadl and what is riba al-nasi'a. But generally Quran only mention the types of one type of riba, which is riba al-nasi'a. In those hadith, we find hadith from Jabir in which it says that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam la'ana Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam akil al-riba wa mu'kilahu wa katibahu wa shahidayhi wa qalahum sawa. The Prophet calls the receiver and the payer of interest, the one who records and the one who witnesses to the transaction, and said they are all alike, that is in guilty. So the la'na also include those who receive, not only the giver, also the recorder who writes, and those who witness the transaction. They are all included in the blame and the cause of Allah on them. Hadith Sa'id Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, may Allah be pleased with him, he also reported from the Prophet that the Prophet mentioned gold and silver and then said, "Do not sell anything of these that is not present in return for what is present." So hadith Abi Sa'id al-Khudri radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, who says, "Inna Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam qala la tabi'u adh-dhaba bidh-dhab illa mithlan bimithli wa la tashuffu ba'daha ala ba'd." To the extent and the end of hadith where it says, وَلَا تَبِعُوا مِنْهَا غَائِبًا بِنَاجِزٍ, as it has been translated in the hadith that I mentioned. Ubadat ibn Samit radiyallahu ta'ala anhu also reported from the Prophet that it says, gold for gold, silver for silver, wheat for wheat, barley for barley, dates for dates, and salt for salt, like for like, equal and equal for equal, and hand to hand. If the commodities differ, then you may sell as you wish, provided that the exchange is hand to hand. In hadith Ubadat ibn Samit, it says that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam called الذهب بالذهب والفضة بالفضة والبر بالبر والشعير بالشعير والتمر بالتمر والملح بالملح مثلا بمثل سواء بسواء يدا بيد فإذا اختلفت هذه الأصناف فبيعوا كيف شئتم إذا كان يدا بيد. So this hadith explains to us that Similar commodity, date with date, cannot be exchanged except if it is like for like, equal 100 kilo with 100 kilo. Okay, and it must be on spots. Okay, but if the asnaf is differ, dates with barley or dates with milk salts, it can be exchanged if it is yadan biyadin. Hadith Bilal also indicates the prohibition of riba, whether nasiha, it depends on how you exchange it. But Hadith Bilal, in which when he visited the Prophet, he brought a good quality of dates. And the Prophet ﷺ asked him, where did you get these dates? Bilal says that he traded 2 volumes of lower quality dates for 1 volume of that of the higher quality. And the Prophet says to him, Hawi, Aino riba. Leave it, take it back. This is exactly riba. This is precisely the forbidden riba. Do not do this. Instead, sell the first type of dates and use the proceeds to buy the other. That is, when you sell the commodity that is with you, the dates with you, and you get the money, go and buy the dates that you want to buy. So you cannot exchange one date with another. You need to sell it. Then after you sell it, you get the money. Then you can buy the commodity that you want. The Tabi'in and Sahaba Ridwanullahi ta'ala alayhim, they also mention about the prohibition of dates in some of their ahadith. We heard Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala and he said, do not trade gold with gold except if it is the same quantity, because I'm afraid that you may be indulging in riba. We also learn from Ibn Musayyab, Ridwanullahi ta'ala alayhim ajma'in. It says, no riba except in gold or currency, or in what is weighed or measured from what is edible or drinkable. In that particular opinion of Ibn Musayyab, it seems that he classified the prohibited thing into 4 categories. Gold, that is currency, measured or weighed from the edible or drinkable things. We also got from Ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu ta'ala anhu when it says riba is 70 and 70 something ways. That is asbabul riba sab'in wa ma fawq. So all these Sahaba with Tabi'in, they all condemned riba. Al-Qurtubi in his tafsir mentioned that the Muslim scholars had consensus, that is ijma' of al-ulama, on the implied meaning of the hadith of Ubadah ibn Samit, in which it says, except on wheat and barley, for which Maliki consider both the same class. That is, hadith Ubadah ibn Samit, in which he mentioned all these 6 asnaf. It mentioned about gold, 1, silver, al-fidda, 2, al-bur, 3, al-sha'ir, 4, al-tamur, 5, and al-milh, 6. All Muslim scholars, they consider them as one family. Only Malik radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, he considered wheat and barley as one family. So he made them as sinful wahid. Thus, they cannot be exchanged on equal and with different time. Now, the classification as nafu al-ribawiya can be 6 according to hadith Ubadah ibn Samit: gold, silver, wheat, barley, dates, and salt. But in the classification of some Muslim scholars, they consider the asnaf as 3: currency, weight, something yani more used, and measure. wama yukal. From edible or beverage, according to Imam Malik. Also, we can say gold, silver, edible, and beverage. That is, الذهب والفضة والمأكولات والمشروبات. These are the classification of riba. If the class is different in equality in exchange, is possible in currency but prohibited in loan. Okay, so what I mean by this is that when there is different, the class is different, like gold and silver, they are different. So it is possible to exchange them, okay, but it is not possible to exchange in other things, but prohibited in loan. For instance, if I give you $1,000, I give you $1,000, that is currency. But I can take extra if it is another currency like pounds or ringgit or any other currency, real, in another country. Okay? They can be 1,500, 2,000, depending on the value of this currency. But I cannot give you as a loan. So said, I loan you $1,000, but you will give me 1,500 dollar in the next 5 years, and so on and so forth. You cannot even loan me and say you will take it in another currency, because it must be yadan biyadin. It must be yadan biyadin. So these are other things that we can classify riba into: measure and weigh one commodity, edible commodities, makulat, stable food like al-ashya, al-khudrawat, and so on and so forth. Okay? Or stable can be essential commodity, essential food of the commodity. So that we include other than what the Prophet mentioned. And that is the question we want to raise here. Can we make analogy on these mentioned commodity in hadith? Yes. If we consider al-muharramat in riba as stable, that is essential commodity of the Muslims. Rice, for instance, is not mentioned in the hadith of the Prophet. Rice is a stable commodity in many worlds today. No country in the world will not take rice as the edible commodity. Okay, so we can say that analogy can be made if it is edible and is stable commodity, like rice and some other maize and so on and so forth. However, what we cannot do analogy on is if it is not edible, it is not stable, it is not measure, it is not weigh, it is not currency. For instance, a car and another car, we can exchange them. I can exchange my Toyota with your Mercedes because they are not part of the Asnaf al-Rabawiyya. Okay, I can exchange. Or I can say, okay, I sell my car to you with another car from you. Okay, if we agree on the contract. What about the clothes that we wear? I can exchange my clothes with another cloth. I can exchange my my shoe with another shoe. They may be differ in quality, they may be differ in quantity, but the most agreed upon among the Muslim scholars is that these commodities should be revolving around what the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in Hadith Ubadat ibn as-Samit. So that hadith is being translated out like this, interpreted like this. If it is currency, the rule says it must be same denomination and there must be a part, that is, there must be the same, equal in quantity. There must be on spots. So meaning that if I want to give you $1 for another $1, it must be 1 and it must be on spot. It is not allowed that I gave you 1,000 note of dollar and you give me $1,200 coins. It is not allowed because it's the same, they are the same value. This may be in paper, in notes, and that could be in coins, but they are the same denomination, they are the same value of currency. But if they differ, that is dollar with pound, there could be difference in the quantity, but it must be on spot. It must be on spot. So we must exchange it on spot. This will raise a question of transferring money from one country to another. So if I buy $1 in America and it's going to be sent to me in another country, what kind of time period is allowed? Is it a day, a minute, a second? That will depend on the situation we find ourselves. For instance, if someone is living in Qatar or in Kuwait or in Bahrain, and the different minutes or hours between Kuwait and America is 12 hours. So if you do transaction in the afternoon and they're still sleeping, it means you have to leave some hours for them to wake up and do the transaction for you. So that is why on spot has been given some kind of liberty because of the dorura we need ourselves. But if it is staple food like bur bil bur wa sha'ir bil sha'ir, if it is the same type like date with date, it must be on spot and it must be the same quantity. But if they are different, like tamar with sha'ir, barley, or with wheat, it must be exchanged on spots. It must be exchanged on spot, but the quantity may be different. It may be 1,000 kilo of dates for 10,000 kilo of barley or wheat. So that's the rule regarding the asnaf and the types of riba. So I've given some clue here, or in a very dramatic way. If it is money one plus money one, dollar with dollar, that is what I mean. The two conditions must be fulfilled. Okay? But if it is food one plus food one, the two conditions also must be fulfilled. But if it is money one plus money two, that is dollar with ringgit or with real, one condition is required, which is hand to hand. Food one plus food two, one condition is required. Money plus food. So if you want to sell food with money, no any condition attached to them. The only condition is at-taradi, and there must be no any gharar in it, and there must be no any impeding condition that will lead to a kind of jahala and gharar in that agreement. Other with other, car with any other electronics, it is allowed to trade them as we agree among ourselves. Okay, so type of riba al-fadl and riba al-nasi'a. Can I ask whether you are with me or not? Hello? Are you with me? Anyone to answer? Can you hear me? الشيخ عبد اللطيف.
يا دكتور كمان.
نعم.
مع حضرتك.
تسمعونني؟
نعم اتفضل.
Okay, now. Type of riba, we have what they call riba al-fadl That is riba in transaction, and sometimes they call it riba fil buyu'. And the other one is riba and nasi'a, riba in loan. It is loan, sorry, not D. And they call it riba fil duyu'. So under Islamic law, riba can occur in two main situations. It could be in loan, when you give someone loan, so and you are expecting him to pay more than what you gave him. That could be considered as riba fid duyun. Okay, it can also occur in these asnaf al-ribawiyya. So if you give me dates as loan, 1 kilo, and you are expecting me to give you 10 kilo of that dates, there is riba in it. Or not only in money, there is loan. In barter, when you do the transaction, I give you 1,000 pounds, and I'm expecting from you 2,000 pounds. So it is also considered as riba fid duyun in currency and also in al-mat'umat, the edible things and beverage. The other one is riba fil buyun, fil buyu' in exchange. So it occurs in that involve exchange of riba bearing commodity without observing the required rules of riba al-fadl. So let us take details of riba al-fadl. Riba al-fadl was prohibited almost 5 years after the hijrah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, according to Imam Sheikh Shirpiti in Adwa al-Bayan. So Usama narration indicate that riba al-fadl was allowed in early Islamic period. It is also reported that Ibn Abbas allowed riba al-fadl. He used to say no riba except in nasi'ah. That is, he doesn't consider riba al-fadl as haram. When Abu Sa'id met him and narrated the hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ prohibits dates with dates, Ibn Abbas said, I seek Allah's forgiveness and repent to him. Astaghfirullah wa atubu ilayh. And since then, he used to prohibit riba al-fadl heavily. So hadith Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, in which the Prophet ﷺ condemned the practice of Bilal, it is also indicated in that hadith that riba al-fadl is what is prohibited, because Bilal exchanged one commodity higher than the one he received from that Sahabi, and the Prophet considered that as ainul riba, ainul riba, and he explained to him how he can make it as halal. That is, he has to sell that commodity, and any money he got from it will be used to buy the commodity, the same tamur that he wants. So Islam doesn't deny you what you want, but you have to follow the due process. And the due process in exchanging the homogeneous commodity is to sell one, get the money, and buy the one that you want. Other than that, it must be the same quality, the same quantity, and it must be exchanged hand to hand on spots. Okay? About nasi'ah, the most popular riba in the pre-Islamic era, that is, fi waqt al-jahiliyyah, qabla al-Islam, is that the creditor will increase on the capital for the debitor. So that is well known in pre-Islam. So the general prohibition of riba in the Quran are meant for riba al-fadl, are meant for riba and nasi'ah. So other hadith of the Prophet indicate prohibition of riba al-fadl as well as riba and nasi'ah. So riba and nasi'ah is well known among the Sahaba. All the Sahaba, they understand that riba and nasi'ah is prohibited, because is a type of riba that has been in existence before the advent of Islam. So there is no any doubt that exchange one commodity with another without equality is a kind of usury that Islam doesn't want, and other religion prohibits something like that. So here I have some of the sales or contracts that we have today, but they are contentious. There are disagreements on them. I mentioned them last week, but the reason why I put them here is that if there are time to explain, I will explain. But if there is no time, I will include it in the discussion next week, where we will be talking about many contracts today, whether it has been in the classical books or modified contract in today's Islamic banking and finance. And among of them is Ijara, Muraba, Mudoraba, and so on and so forth. We will discuss about those contracts next week, inshallah. But today, in order to fill the time, we need to talk a bit on these contracts. Some of them have what they call gharar, some of them have jahala, some of them have riba in it, some of them have adam muru'a, immorality in it, al-gish, deception, and so forth. Some of them include all these type of prohibition. It could be gharar plus jahala plus riba, and so forth. So the first one will be about the down payments. So I will talk about down payments today, and I will finish what we're supposed to discuss, which is illatul tahrim, why Islam prohibits a riba. And if we have time, we go back to bi'ul ina, bi'ul dain, and bi'ul tawarruk. But if no, then I will explain all these three types of sales in our discussion next week. Now let us talk about bi'u al-urbun. Is a down payment. It's referred to a sale contract in which a person who wants to purchase a certain property will first pay earnest money to the seller on the condition that if the sale is executed, the advance payment will go towards the price of the good. And if the sale is not executed, the down payment is considered a gift from the buyer to the seller. That is a general perception about al-urbun. But majority of Muslim scholars prohibits something like that because it involves ambiguities and uncertainty, al-gharar wal-jahala, and takes another person's money without proper compensation. So the money that we pay before we take the commodity, if we couldn't buy the commodity, it goes to the owner of the property, that is the seller. So that could be a kind of ambiguity and uncertainty, and it could include what I called last week immorality in business. Actually, amwal an-nas bil batil. We know that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions about the practice of Jew, He says, وَأَخْذِهِمْ مُرِّبَا وَقَدْ نُهُوا عَنْهُ وَأَكْلِهِمْ أَمْوَالَ النَّاسِ بِالْبَاطِلِ. So not only taking riba is prohibited, but also if you take people's money without any justification, then that is questionable from Islamic point of view. Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal argues for its permissibility based on another hadith. Okay, so he brought some other proof, which is reported that Nafi' ibn Abdul Harith, he bought for Umar the jailhouse building from Safwan bin Umayyah for 4,000 dirham on the condition that if Umar approves that kind of transaction, then the sale is executed. Otherwise, Safwan may take 400 dirham. without returning back to him. So that will lead us to Amal Sahaba, Hal Hujjah or Laysa bi Hujjah. I think there is a contention in Usul Fiqh whether the practice of Sahaba could be considered as proof, evidence in any transaction. But other scholars mention that al-urbun can be permitted based on the urf, okay, based on the urf. That is why the Islamic Jurisprudence Council, Majma' al-Fiqh al-Islam, in its 8th session in Brunei on the 1st of Muharram, also decided that Bay'ul Urbun is permissible. Okay? So whether it is the right or a penalty is debatable. But my suggestion is that, or my opinion is that, if the down payment is taken by the owner of the property as a result of the failure of the buyer, the proposer, then there could be a justification in the sense that it might have caused some problem to the seller, because the seller will not be able to sell the commodity to any other person, and that could lead to loss for the seller. So for that reason, that could be a justification for the seller not to return the money back to the buyer, potential buyer, if he fails to buy it. However, if there is any justification for the failure, or even the seller decide not to sell it, then we may say that taking that money is not allowed by the seller, because it's like akli amwal nas bil batil. Okay, so Berudain, because it has many explanations, I will leave it. If I have time, I will refer back to it. But if not, inshallah, next week I will talk about it. So let us go to the reason behind the prohibition of riba. Okay, it can be said that riba is prohibited because it is a kind of taking people's money, okay, without any justification. However, it is prohibited because it exerts disastrous effects on human societies by reinforcing the tendency of wealth accumulation in fewer hands. What we mean by that is that when the lender lends money for people, people will take it. They may lose in the transaction or the business they are doing with the money, but the lender will always get profits, and money will always come back to the lender, and the lender will always be rich, and the borrower may lose the money and it may become bankrupt. So for that reason, it is considered that riba or interest has huge effects, disastrous effect on society, because it makes money to be accumulated in the hand of fewer people. It also leads to an ever-increasing share of risk-free capital. That is, the lender will be exonerated from risk. He will always get his money back. And that money he is getting will result in business failure. Because if I were to return money back and I do not get any profits, and I'm continually returning excess on the loan I take from the bank, it means I'm in a devastating situation. So it could lead to unemployment, it could lead to gross inequality in income and the wealth. So all these things has effect in economic chaos. And if you see what is going on in the world today, the crash in the markets is as a result of interest. And that is why you see some country in America and Britain, they are trying to lowering the interest rates to probably 0.5. Even that 0.5 is not allowed from Sharia point of view, because it has accumulating disastrous effects on the society. So Islam is opposed to exploitation in every form and stand for fair and equitable dealings among all human beings. So there is no way you can exploit your brother in Islam. There is no way you can leverage on the less privileged situation. So Islam wants everything to be equal among the adherents of the society. So that is why in the interpretation of the verse in the Quran, chapter 2, verse 275, where Allah says, وَأَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَى, the scholar says, in trade, the criteria is because fair exchange of good and value must be done. Otherwise, there'll be unfair exchange and also fair distribution of risk and return. So in Buyur, if the risk has been shifted on one party and the other party is always guaranteed of profits, that could lead to a riba as well. In loan, that is usury, it could be oppressive, unfair distribution of risk and return, and unjustified enrichment at the expense of others. So in James Robinson, when it was explaining about how the interest-based system works to favor the rich and what role the present money system plays in the following word. It says, the pervasive role of interest in the economic system results in the systematic transfer of money from those who have less to those who have more. That is, they will transfer money of less privileged people to those who are very privileged. Again, this transfer of resource from poor to the rich has been made shockingly clear by the third world debt crisis. So you see last decade or 2 decades ago, when we have crash in the business and in the recession, inflation high. So this is what it's trying to say, but it's applied universally, not only in the world, developed world, it also affects the developing world, underdeveloped world. It is partly because those who have more money to lend get more interest than those who have less. Those who have less often have to borrow more, and partly because the cost of interest repayments now forms a substantial element in the cost of all goods and services. So if I have debt, I have to include all the interest I'm going to pay on the commodity I'm going to sell. And the price of commodity will high, and people will be struggling to buy or to pay back what they've taken. So in a nutshell, what he's trying to say is that the problem of interest riba in the world today is devastating because it makes money reside in the hand of particular people and others will be starving. You can remember some country, especially in developing country, Nigeria and others, the money they borrow, they've never paid it, the capital, but they are serving the debt till now, more than 20, 30 years, 50 years. And that is why sometimes they will say, okay, we relieve you of so amount of percentage of your debt, not the capital, but the interest. And where are they going to get it when the money in circulation is lesser than the money in demand? What I mean by that in economics is that the money they injected in the public is lesser than the money they are demanding to return back to the government. So if the government injected 1 billion and we put interest of 10% on it, it means 10 billion plus 10%. You are demanding from the public to find. Where are they going to find this money? There is nothing like that in the public in circulation. Only 10 billion is in circulation. But the demand that you are demanding from the public is more than what you put in circulation. And that will cause chaos and some kind of devastation to the less privileged people. And that is the reason why Islam condemns any type of riba, because it causes economic crash and people will be in devastation, and there will be a kind of starving and bankruptcy in the business. So that is the reason why we have to refrain from the riba in any of our transaction, be it in a buyu or in duyun. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر الله ولكم ولجميع المسلمين إنه هو الغفور الرحيم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Inshallah, next week I will continue to talk about the other tawaruk, bi'ul-ina, and bi'ud-dayn. These three sales will be included in types of buyu' next week by the grace of Allah. If there's any question, the moderator can come in now.
جزاك الله كل خير دكتور.
Any question?
على ما اظن لا، شكرا لحضرتك.
Hello? Okay. There is a question here. Hello, can you hear me?
نعم تفضل دكتور.
There is a question in the charts which says, is there any equivalent of compound interest in Islam, like there is in profit in what? In icons? Yes, there is no any compound interest in Islam. Okay, Islam doesn't charge interest at all. Okay, but what we can do is, if someone fails to do something, the Muslim scholars allows what they call penalty, and that penalty may not be part of the asset of the bank. It must be used for charitable activities. Okay, simply because that money is not allowed for the bank to use as their capital. So there's nothing like compound interest in Islam. Even there is not any interest in Islam. The only thing in Islam is that you get profits in any of the commodity you sell. And if it is loan, there is no way you can charge someone even profits. Okay? Because there's hadith of the Prophet. It says, Ayu qardun jarra nafa'an fahuwa riba. Any loan that attracts benefit for you is riba. So, but some scholars say, well, if you loan someone money and from his own interest, he give you gifts that you can take it. And that has happened during the time of the Prophet, and there was no any problem. However, the one that is not allowed is that in condition of the contract of the loan, there is a statement that if it fails, it will pay extra. And that is where the problem lies. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. The other question here says, so if the interest take from the wadi'ah in Islamic bank constitutes riba. Okay, that is interesting. The interest take from wadi'ah in Islamic bank is not riba according to the shuruts of the contracts. What they give you is gifts, hiba. In most cases, they will said they are giving you hiba. And according to what I said now, ayu qardin jarra nafa'an for riba, but some scholars said that if there's no any condition that you want to take extra, or you the one who give the loan doesn't give any condition from that no that could lead to extra, there's no any problem. So if the wadi'a in the bank is meant for wadi'a and they give you any extra, that will be a gift or hiba. I believe in Islamic bank or bank ma'amalat in Malaysia, they use the term hiba for anything that they give you over your capital in the bank in any account of wadi'a. However, if the money is not wadi'a or it is wadi'a, called wadi'a, but there is agreement between you and the bank you sign that the money will be used for any activities, business, and they will give you profits, then it is Allah wallahu ta'ala a'lam. The third question from Ibrahim Ahmad, he says, the thought on sports is confusing for me at times. That is probably the way it is put in English. Can Prof please give a practical example with a real world practice? Okay, what we mean by sports in the classical book is that a physical appearance of the two contracting party. So the seller and the buyer. So once they exchange in a physical environment. And you know, in those days, there was no any internet business, online business, okay? But today, when we have online business and so on and so forth, a sport can be time duration you gave to the contract. Saying, I want to exchange money with someone in America. And I said, the time duration for you to get your money in your account will be 3 working days. That 3 working days is considered as spot. That is, the contract has been sealed within 1 minute. That is, if you go to online, you exchange money, and they will give you what you are going to get in Malaysia or wherever you be. And you submitted it, and it said successful. That means it has been spot. It has been spot like that according to the modern transaction. However, if the time they promise that the money will be in your account fails, that is, it's supposed to be 3 working days, but you couldn't receive it 3 working days. You have the right to cancel the contracts. And that is where the khiyar supposed to be stipulated in the contract that if there is any failure for you to get your money within 3 working days, you have right of canceling the contract, and your money will be returned back to you. Okay, but if we want to think about the physical one, there are some commodities which can be exchanged on spot, and there are some commodities which cannot be exchanged on spot. So as it is meant in the classical book. But today, the Muslim scholars have come to agreement that spot can mean duration you give in the contracts, that the money or the exchange will reach you, and that can be accepted if there is not any way to exchange it physically, yadan bi yadin, as it is stated in the classical book. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. Okay, so no more any question at the moment. Hello. So if there's no question, can we call it a day? And inshallah we meet next week Tuesday.
اعتقد مفيش اي اسئله اخرى.
Okay. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمه الله وبركاته.